Hi, I'm Allie with PotomacBeads.com. Join me in making Anna's hanging garden earrings. They're going to be featuring some quadritiles along with learning how to do a right angle weave chain. Gather up your materials, which were listed before, or you can find them listed below in the details, as well as links to purchase from us at PotomacBeads.com. So in her design live, Anna ended up coming up with this here with the quadritiles. And we went back and forth and kind of gave each other suggestions and said what it would look good as. And we decided as an earring, and kind of I changed up the chain a little bit, but I kept the actual center by itself. Because of the curvature, you could actually do the same thing as kind of a bracelet for the hanging basket earrings. So you could do it as a bracelet, you could do it as a pendant. We had actually played around with kind of sticking a crystal on the inside and seeing what that came up with. But I'm going to show you how to do the right angle weave chain along the sides, and we're going to work with the quadritiles. To begin, I want you to put on a size 12 needle onto 0.006 wildfire beading thread, and then go ahead and put a stop bead onto the base of that thread. You just need a stop bead with about 1.5 to 2 inches at the end of the thread, because we're eventually actually going to take it off our needle. And because of that, I usually tend to use a bead that's not included in my pattern. That way I remember that it needs to come off. From here, we're going to start with the check glass. So we have the 4mm in the Golden Touch cerulean, and we're going to add onto our needle one of our quadritiles, and then after the quadritile, the 11O in the metallic amethyst gunmetal, which is a Toho brand, then one of our 4mm, and then another 11O. You're going to repeat this 4 times, which is going to get you a total of 5 quadritiles. So we're going to put that on. And you could also do this for another look with quadrilaterals as well. So go ahead and put on that series of 4. And letting them drop down next to that stop bead. It's going to get its curvature because when we get to the crystals, we're actually going to change up the count a little bit, and that's how we get that. As I get my second to last quadritile in here, I'll get ready to add my final bead in place, and then I'm ending with a quadritile. Coming out of the quadritile, I'm going to continue with my 4mm bead. So coming out of the quadritile, I want you to grab 3 of your 11s, put them on your needle, and then we're going to go into the quadritile, the last one here, and we're going to go into the bead hole that sits on a diagonal. So we're going into the diagonal hole. Once you're into that diagonal hole, I want you to give a little bit of a nice tight pull, making sure that you don't have any extra thread showing. The same thing on this side, you're going in and adding in 111. Let's move the guy over. 111, 1 check 4, and you could do these crystals if you wanted them a little blingy. That's the fun of a lot of this live stuff, is there's a lot of variations that you can do. And then when you sew into the next quadritile, just make sure again you're going on that diagonal, leaving 2 empty holes. And if it wants to pull like that, go ahead and just pull it tight and make sure that extra thread's not showing. Again, we're going to do this 4 times as well, going through and adding. And generally speaking, I work with a size 12 or a size 10 needle because of these heavier beads, but a 12 is necessary for our chain portion. Going ahead then and adding, I'm going into that diagonal hole, which is going to be the second hole of that quadritile. And then I have my third, same deal, going into that diagonal hole. And because these are the same counts, this is going to sit pretty straight. When you pull the thread, it'll sit a little bit curved, but overall pretty much this is going to sit straight. Again, we're going to get that curvature when we go in and add our crystals, which is going to happen next. After you get your last 4mm bead in with the 15 O's there, sewing through that last quadritile, you're coming out near the quadritile on the side of the stop bead, and again you're coming out diagonal. Once you come out that diagonal way here, I want you to add 3 11s, just like we did on the other side. This time when we add our 3 11O seed beads, we're going to be going into the hole that sits next to the hole we're coming out of in the quadritile. So one of the holes has the stop bead there. We're coming out with the one that's on the diagonal, and then you're going to go to one of the holes sitting beside. Doesn't matter which one, right or left. When you're coming out of the hole that's sitting beside, I want you to go ahead and add on to your thread and needle working with it. We're going to add 1/15, 1.5 by 2 millimeter crystal, which can be switched to a 2 millimeter if you would like. It's going to have just a little bit less curvature. And then another 11L, and then sew through the adjacent hole on the quadratile. So on goes in 11, crystal, 11, sew through the next quadratile. So basically same pattern, just instead of a 4 millimeter, you're using a crystal in the center. Through to the next hole, and one more time. And you can see just a little bit of curvature is happening because this is a little bit shorter than the 4 millimeter, obviously because it's a 1.5 millimeter. After you come out the last hole here, what I'm going to have you do is get to the other side basically, and we're going to add the outer row of our crystals that sit to the outside. To get there, I want you to pick up 1/11 onto your needle, and once you have that 1/11, you're going to go to the center bead of that grouping of 3 and sew through that center bead. It honestly doesn't matter which way you're coming through there. Pick up one more 11 and sew through the one remaining empty hole of the quadratile. Give a nice little tight pull to again start that curvature. Now we have one hole left of the quadratile. What we're going to do on that one hole is put on a series of crystals. We're going to put on 2 this time. 1/11, 1 crystal, 1/11, and then I want you to repeat that with another crystal and another 11O seed bead. So you have 11 crystal, 11 crystal, 11. That's going to go then down towards that last quadratile, and you're going to sew through the next empty hole. And there you go. And we're going to repeat that again. So we're doing 11 crystal, 11 crystal, 11. And then again over to that next hole of the quadratile. So I've got 2 groupings of that, and you can see that curvature starting to happen already, again, because we're going from having 1 on the top to 2 on the bottom. Then it's sitting correctly on the sides because we used the same amount of check glass. So I have 2 more groupings of this to add, going in and repeating that pattern of that 1 crystal seed. And my needle's pretty bent up, so I should probably straighten it out. That's a little hint for you. You can straighten out your needle actually with a needle nose pliers if you bend up your 11L. I bent mine up a little bit making the first one. So I'm going in here and I'm going to add my 11 crystal, 11 crystal, 1 more 11 in that amethyst gunmetal color. And then as I come through this quadratile, I'm going to come out through the last quadratile. I'm going to add an 11L. Sew through that 11 that sits on the other side, that middle one. So remember we had that group of 3, you're sewing through that middle bead. Then we're going to go add 1 more. And you're going to go down the quadratile, making sure that you're not going through and not sewing through the stop bead, but you're going down through that same hole the stop bead is coming out of, and I want you to come out right after the quadratile. From here, I want you to go back up through the quadratile hole that we just came out of, which is going to expose just the tiniest little bit of our thread from one quadratile hole to the other. You can see I'm going to go from one hole to the other and up. Give a nice tight pull to make sure that we have our nice kind of oval shape. At this point here, I'm going to take off my stop bead, grab my 2 thread ends here, and literally just tie them in a knot. Right over left, left over right. You can, if you want to, at this point, go ahead and burn down that starter thread. Burn it down short and then burn it down towards the project, or you can keep it on a little bit if you want. I'll do the final burn and get it right down there when I am finished with my chain portion. So that gets us the bottom portion, which you actually, I was thinking about this earlier, could have fun kind of changing it up and snaking them back and forth. It would be an awesome, awesome, fun necklace working if you did it in a long version. So there's a challenge for some of you. Coming out here then this end, I want to sew up through the 11 that sits right above the knot and through the middle 11. So that way my thread and needle are coming out through that middle 11. At this point here, other than doing a seed bead or a crystal and a 4mm at the top, I actually am done with this color of my Toho seed bead. Here's a little look. I usually use the cap as something to pick up my beads, clear up my bead mat. Again, I just need one crystal, so I'm going to get rid of all the rest, put them back in the tube because there's a lot in here. And then we're going to get ready and use so my 4, my crystal, and my wire guard off to the side up here. So they're all ready to go when I get ready to use them, hanging out up there. From here then, I'm going to get ready to do my actual chain portion of the hanging basket earrings. The chain portion is going to be based on right angle weave. So if you don't know right angle weave, you may want to watch a right angle weave video first. And then from there, we're going to get ready to go ahead and kind of come down and embellish that right angle weave. So to start our right angle weave, we are coming out of that center 11-0. And we're going to be doing this with 15-0s. And I've chosen the champagne, the Duracoat champagne color, because I think it looks really, really nice with the Aztec gold. So I'm picking up 3 beads, and we're going to do a series of our right angle weave, going back through that 11-0 that the thread is coming out of, circling around through the 11-0. If you're not familiar with the right angle weave, basically we just put on a group of 3. You always want your needle to come through and up to the top. So we're always coming up to the top, which is going to be bead number 2. Circling around, making sure you don't see any thread kind of hopping one side to the other. Then again, we put on 3 more beads. And you can make this as long or as short as you want. 3 more beads go on. You're going to sew into the opposite side of that 15-0 that the thread is coming out of to the other side. And then where do I go? I need to make sure that I get to the top, which is going to be that second bead that we just added, sewing through and around. After you're through each little right angle weave unit, which is that group of 4 beads, kind of forming a diamond there, you're going to give a nice tight pull just to tighten it up. Again, 3 beads go on, and you continue that chain. You can keep that chain if you want just as is and not make it as full as I'm going to show you. If you want to do that, I would suggest using a lighter color thread or even like a KO gold if you are using the same colors. So right now I have on here 3 completed right angle weave units. I'm going to go ahead and get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 right angle units. So I'm going to continue on with those right angle units, adding on 3 beads and then sewing back around in a circle to get to that second bead that I sewed out of, which is going to create and end that right angle unit. So again, there goes 3 beads on. I generally flip it in my hand as I'm working on it. Go back up through those first 2 beads that you just added, coming out through that center bead, pulling the little thread a little tighter, and there you have it. So continue doing that a couple more passes as long as you want. It doesn't really matter again. Shorter, longer, I'm going to make 7 right angle weave units altogether, which is going to be 7 groupings of those 3 beads. Once you're coming out of the top of that last right angle weave unit, you're going to go ahead and add on a crystal, a 4mm bead, and your wire guard. At this point, like I said, you can just keep that chain like it is so it looks a little bit more fine, or you can go ahead and embellish it like I'm going to do coming down the side to make a little bit of a thicker look on that right angle weave. So I have my crystal 4mm wire guard. Go back down the opposite side of the wire guard, back down the 4mm, and back through that crystal bead. Obviously you can top off the top with whatever beads you want, or no beads at all, and just end with that right angle weave. From here I'm going to tighten up that thread, And then I'm going to sew back into that last 11-0 that my thread was coming out of, just like if I was doing right angle weave, sewing through, coming into it from the other side, and then out. So I'm sewing into the other side. Just kind of wiggle through there if you need to, and pull the thread out. From here, we're going to go down one side of the right angle weave, and then we're going to go through that 11-0 C bead and come back the other side. To go down the one side, what we're going to do is be adding in an 11-0 between all of our side beads in our right angle weave. So when we did the right angle weave, we added 1, 2, and 3 beads. Basically what we're going to do is add 1 15 and then sew down through all those beads on the right hand side, which would have been the first bead that we put onto our right angle unit, we'll call it. Those of you that know right angle, you know that you kind of went from one side to the other side, but we're going to go down that whole right side, adding in 1 bead between each of our beads that sits on the right. So you can see you add 1 bead, and then you sew through the next bead on the right. Add a bead, sew through the next bead on the right. So you're literally just going down the whole side, adding 1 more bead into that right angle weave, which is going to make it look a little bit more kind of fluffy. So we're going in and adding on 1 bead that's going to sit into that side bead. We're going to come back up then the left side, doing the exact same thing, going through and adding a bead. And as we go along the left side, we're going to be sewing up through the bead that sits on the left. As you come to the bottom, when you're getting ready to come through the last one, you're going to leave a little bit of a tight pull. It's going to tighten up that right angle weave and make it a tiny bit shorter. Go ahead and add your last bead in, and then as you go through the last bead that sits at that first starter right angle weave unit, I want you to sew through the bead on the right, just like we've been doing, adding your last final 15 on that side. Sew through the 11-0 that sits as the first bead in that right angle unit, and out to the other side. From here then, we're going to go up through the other side. So I'm just going to sew up through that 15-0 that sits on the left hand side, and then we add in our 15s on the left. So you can see how it curves to the right now because we pulled it a little bit. Now we're going to curve up to the left and it'll start to balance it out. So add a 15, sew up the bead on the left hand side. Now I prefer to sew to the right. So I prefer when I sew actually on the right hand side. So I don't want to confuse you. I'm going to stay on the left, but it's easier if you flip the project in your hand and sew up the other side. I'm going to, like I said, kind of stay on the left there. And you can see I turn it towards myself or towards the bottom, which makes it more comfortable and easier to sew. Flipping it completely would be the better option. So I'm adding a bead, sewing up through the beads that sit on the left hand side, tightening up that right angle weave and giving more of a ladder look to that right angle weave. As you come out the top then, we're going to reinforce our wire guard and reinforce coming down through our beads that are there, and then we're going to start the right angle weave on the other side. So on the first side, you're starting from the bottom or from the piece going up towards the top. On the other side, as we come down, we're going to start at the top where the beads are and come down to the other direction. You want to make sure however many passes of right angle weave you do on the right hand side, or the starter side, you're also doing on the left hand side. So coming out here, I'm going to add my last of my 15s in. Give a nice little tight pull. You can see how much thicker that makes that right angle weave look. Go through that 15 that sits right below the beads here. Coming out the 15 then, if you want to, you can go up and reinforce right along the top. If you're worried about the size bead that you have there and it's getting a little bit full to say with the thread, you actually can use an 11-0 as the last bead there. I'm going to wiggle mine through, and then I'll show you how we're going to start the right angle weave down the other side. So down the other side now, what we're going to do is do the right angle weave again. The first bead in our right angle weave is going to be the bead that's already there. So I'm going to add 3 more beads, And then if you can, sew back through that bead. My bead honestly is getting a little bit tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew through the bridge thread. So underneath that little thread pass there, making sure it stays to the top of my design. And that's going to link onto my right angle weave there. From here, I'm going to continue with that right angle weave. You can kind of bend that back to the side. Sew through the first 2 beads you add in. And then continue your right angle weave. So on go 3 more beads. And after those 3 beads, sewing back through that bead that your thread is coming out of. And again, continuing on just with right angle weave. So however many passes you did on the other side and how many units of that right angle weave you did, that's how many units you're going to do on this side as well. So go ahead here. Sewing through the 2 beads, 1 and 2. Then I'm not going to make you watch me do 6 more units of the right angle weave, but we're going to do 6 more units of the right angle weave, and then we're going to sew into that 11-0 seed bead to final up and do our last version of our right angle weave. We'll then come up, go with the right hand side and the left hand side, adding in the seed beads right along the outer edge. So I have my 7 units of my right angle weave here, and to go in and finish off, I'm coming out through that second bead just like we did with the others. I'm going to add 1 of my 15s, and then I'm going to sew through that 11-0 seed bead that sits in the middle of that X in front of the quadratile. Coming out of there, I'm going to add 1 more seed bead and sew through that middle 15 that our thread was coming out of. Give a nice little tight pull, and that gets our chain done on our right hand side. Now what we have to do is just embellish and going up the sides. We are going to reinforce, kind of going back through that right angle weave, going back down the right 15 through that 11, and then as we come up through the 11 on the left hand side here, here's where we're going to go in and actually add in our seed beads. So again, I'm not going to make you watch me do this and add in the seed beads because you already did. You're just literally adding in a 15-0, and then after you add in that 15-0, go ahead and sew through that next 15-0 that sits on that same side. Again, making that chain look a little bit thicker. Go ahead up on the right hand side, adding in, go through that middle bead and down to the left hand side as well. Once you're done coming down the other side, all you need to do is give a tight little nice little tight pull. Go through that 11-0 that sits right at the base of the stitch. Go down through the stitch a little bit. And because you did a bunch of right angle weave and kind of going through, you can literally just sew back through the project a little bit rather than knotting off, and you'll have the end of your thread, which then we can go in with the thread burner. If you don't have a thread burner, I would totally suggest getting it. You can comment in the comments below which one's your favorite. I love my thread burner, and I'm just going to go in here. Since I am down here and it's hidden, I'll go in and just do a small little knot, sewing underneath the bridge thread, kind of making a loop. And then once I have that loop, go ahead and sew through that little loop and knot off the thread. And you won't see it because the beads down there are pretty large. Go in then with your thread burner and your thread zap, burn off one edge, and then burn that flush down next to the project. From here, I'll go in and actually put on my ear wire just like I did with the other one. So when you're putting on an ear wire, one thing that you want to make sure, whether or not it's a lever back, doesn't really matter which kind of ear wire it is. You want to go in and make sure that you're opening the ear wire by pulling to the side. Because what happens with a lot of different ear wires is that you're actually going to have kind of an opening here, excuse me, that is open, and you don't want to pull back on it, and you want to slide to the side. Add on your little wire guard there, close her up, and then your fun hanging garden earrings are done. And they're so cute, so easy with those quadratiles. that you can, again, you can use the quadrilentals and kind of change up the design. And hopefully you learned a little bit about creating that right angle weave version as well too. Thanks so much for joining me in making the hanging basket earrings. Again, these were designed during one of our design lives, which you can catch live on Facebook for when we battle out with different beads. Keep in mind, if you need any of the materials, you can go back to the beginning of the video or below the video. Near the subscribe and that like button are links to the different projects to order from us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. Thanks again so much for watching, and enjoy your own hanging basket earrings.